Good morning. Last time we did an introduction to halacha base, just an introduction, overview of all the different things that you could do with milk and making cheese and a whole assortment of different things that you can make out of it. I'm now ready to start the halacha base. Gevinas Yisroel, cheese is made by goyim, asrum. They made them. The chacham asur them. The nation amid matzah or kevis shchitasam. Because you can make those, they make those cheeses. That's how they do it. They make them with skin from the stomach of the animal, and if they do that from their animals, it's shehin avela. It's in avela because they didn't shecht it. So mavela, they would make the cheese treif. So because of that concern, Chacham assered all the gevinas, and the mechaber ends off that vafilu hamidim basavim asur. Even if we know that they happen to have not used a kevis level, they used a plant-based rennet. I'm not sure exactly what that means, how you make it out of plants, but what?
Portugal, that's so.
In Portugal, okay. We said last time that rennet is what's called a protease, so if they get one out of a plant, they can make a cheese out of it also. Again, I think Shulchan said such a thing. Even if we knew they did it like that, then it's still not kosher, because the Chacham made a takana that you're not allowed to have gevina, because there's chashash that they might use it using kevis nevela. They made such an essay. Okay, so this mechaber is saying the din that we've heard this din, which is this the din of Gevinas Yisroel, that is a goyish cheese is not you're not allowed to eat a goyish cheese. Okay, what does that mean? A Gevinas Yisroel, and what does it mean? Gevinas what we call Gevinas Yisroel, the kosher kind of a cheese. That's going to be a mixture for 2 times from now. What does it take to make it? For now, we'll just believe it that if you walk into Walmart and you pick up a package of Munster cheese, that's treif. Okay, that's it.
We're not talking about something like cream cheese.
That's what we're talking about today. It's about cream cheese, right?
No, I'm saying when you say Gevinas,
that's what we're going to talk about today. Whether
about cheese,
we're going to talk about that. But whatever the Shulchan is saying is that there's some kind of a cheese that if you go out and you buy it, it's not kosher. What it takes to make kosher cheese, we'll do it 2 times. But for that, hopefully, but this time we're going to talk about something else. We're going to talk about.
I just out of curiosity, all these companies that make like cream cheese, they all have.
No, we're going to talk about that today. That's what we're going to talk about. Okay. Hold a second. Okay. Okay. One more thing is of what we're going to not talk about is that the Shulchan said is I just got to clear it off the table. That the Shulchan said the chashash is that they make it from kevis nevela. They shecht an animal, take out a piece from the stomach, from the or of the keva, from a certain part of the stomach, and they take that piece off and they put it in to make the cheese. Okay, the implication sounds pretty clear that if they would make it from keva shchuta. Okay, it means if we would shecht an animal and take the keva from that animal and use it to make cheese, that wouldn't have been a problem. The problem is that the goyim use kevis nevela. Like the mechaber makes a point, they take it from or keva shchitasum shehi nevela, as if to say that if they make it from keva of a shchuta, it'll be kosher. And the obvious question on that is, well, what happened to basar b'cholav? Okay, keva is basar and milk is cholav. So what happens
if you make out of bracha?
What? No, but he says, so what do you say? They make it from a keva. What do you just, the Gemara happens to say keva is what is it? They make it from a keva. The reason, because it's basar b'chol. That would be the simpler answer with basar b'chol. So that the Taz
make the same thing. So what's the difference if they make it or we make it?
So that's a question. Why isn't it a problem? What happened? It's basar b'chol. It's meat and milk, right? That's not kosher. So the Taz talks about it over here, but we're not going to talk about it. We're going to save it for Siman Pei Zayin. That's what we talk about it. The shaila about whether is it mutter or asur, or is it b'diavad to make cheese out of kosher keva? Could you take a piece out of a shechted animal, take the piece out of the keva and make cheese out of it? Okay, so now those are the things we're not going to talk about. Okay, so now what we're going to talk about, which is we said last time we described different cheeses. We for our purposes can break down all cheeses into these 2 big groups. Okay, one is we call the Rennet set cheeses, and one is the acid set cheeses. Rennet set cheeses, otherwise known like the hard cheeses, those are cheeses that the way you get it to coagulate is with rennet, and the acid set cheeses are the ones that you put an acid in or you let it acidify, and it makes an acid set cheese. And just to remind you that Rennet set cheeses, the hard cheeses are Munster cheese and mozzarella cheese. Those are what we call American cheese, and those kind of cheeses. Those are what we call the hard cheeses. And the soft cheeses are cream cheese and cottage cheese and farmer cheese and things like that. Okay?
What's American cheese?
American cheese is actually
cheddar cheese.
Certain kinds of cheeses, let's say cheddar, which is then processed, it's cooked and processed. So it's not a, so to speak, a real cheese. But it's within the hard cheese group.
It's within the hard.
Yeah, it's made out of rennet. The way you make the cheese
is there 6 hours?
No. We're not talking about 6 hours. 6 hours is a different thing. If you have an aged cheese, you wait 6 hours. The Shulchan uses the word hard. For our purposes, we're calling hard and soft between whether you use rennet to make the cheese or you use something acidic to make the cheese. Okay, so the cheeses that are what called the hard cheeses, the rennet cheeses, those are pashut, that those need to be Gevinas Yisroel, because the way you make them is by putting in rennet. So there's a chashash that if you buy the Kosher cheese, then you put in the treif rennet. So that's an obvious. We're going to call it animal rennet. Even though you can make animal rennet, that's kosher. Just for simplicity, we call it animal rennet. You can make it out of animal rennet. So obviously those need to have Gevinas Yisroel. The question is whether the soft cheeses, cottage cheese and cream cheese and sour cream and yogurt, do those things need to be made with Gevinas Yisroel? Because they're not made with rennet. So if they're not made with rennet, then on the one hand we should say, well, they're not made with rennet. If they're not made with rennet, what's the chashash? There's no chashash that they made yogurt with rennet. It has nothing to do with it. You don't make yogurt out of rennet. You use yogurt out of, either you acidify it, or you put it in cultures, or you let it sour right. So there's different ways to do it. We talked about it last time. But you don't use rennet to make it. So maybe the simple looking at it would be is that there's no reason for Chum to ask that thing. Okay? What's the other side? The other side is that the reason for the takana is because of a chashash that they put in rennet. But once the Chum made the takana, that cheese needs to be Gevinas Yisroel because of a chashash they put in rennet, that chashash now the takana includes all cheeses. It's a light plug. And the takana includes all cheeses. Those cheeses that have rennet and those cheeses that don't have rennet. It doesn't make a difference. Just like the takana includes cheeses that are made with asavim, that the rennet came from a plant-based item. So too, light plug, and you would say it also includes things that are made. Cream cheese doesn't have any rennet in it, but even so, if you don't make it with rennet, even so, it could be included in here. That's the other side. Okay. But you could argue on this point also. You could say that it's not a light plug because maybe to a consumer looking in the store, mozzarella cheese and cottage cheese all look the same. Cheese is cheese, but to people who know what they're doing, cottage cheese and mozzarella cheese have nothing to do with each other. Maybe we call them cheese, but they're two totally different classes of foods. Hard cheese and soft cheese are not the same. For example, we know that the din of that butter doesn't require Gevinas Yisroel. Okay, we talk about Malach Gimel, but butter doesn't need Gevinas Yisroel. Why not? It's something that's solid, that's made out of milk. Well, of course, because we saw last time, butter has no shaykhus to cheese. It has nothing to do with cheese. It's not a separation of proteins that creates this. It has nothing to do with it. It's skimming off cream off the top. It's a whole different bird. It has nothing to do with it. So maybe just like the butter doesn't need Gevinas Yisroel, so maybe so too, soft cheese and hard cheese are like two different classes of foods. The fact that the Hamayim calls them both cheese doesn't really make such a difference. Okay, so within this last point that I made, that maybe there's two classes of cheeses, there's one group that's even more kal, even more reason to make on one group, and that is yogurt and sour cream. Okay, because yogurt and sour cream are very different than other cheeses. We mentioned this last time, but yogurt and sour cream are different than all the other hard and soft cheeses that we mentioned, and that is all hard cheeses and all soft cheeses are made. You do something that pulls out the protein, the casein protein out of it, with or without fat. It pulls it out, leaving behind a liquid. So we get out certain solids that we want, leaving behind other liquid gets left behind. The whey gets left behind. That's all hard and soft cheeses. Yogurt and sour cream are not like that. Yogurt and sour cream are the solidification of the whole milk. When you take a gallon of milk and you make yogurt, the whole gallon of milk turns into yogurt. You don't have leftovers afterwards. Okay? There are yogurts that are like that. There are yogurts that are like that that are filtered. I'm forgetting the word now, what we call it. That are filtered that you actually get out, separate a solid from a liquid. But by and large, sour creams and yogurts are made by you solidify the whole thing. So that's really dramatically different than other cheeses. So if you want to say, like I was saying to you, maybe soft and hard cheeses are two separate classes, and one has the takana and one doesn't. There's no loy plug. Even if you don't want to say that, you want to say, no, cheese is cheese. It's all pulling out casein. But it's harder to say that for yogurt and sour cream, because the yogurt and sour cream are made are not like, you don't pull something out and leave something behind. That's sort of like the feature of cheese, that you pull something out of the milk and left something behind. You don't do that. This yogurt and sour cream are the whole thing. You're getting the whole milk, whatever milk you put in is what you get out. Okay. So that's a question. Should we be machmir on to say that soft cheeses need Gevinas Yisroel or they don't need them. Okay, so there's many shittas in the poskim, many poskim who have talked about it either directly or indirectly. One is there's a machlokes. We'll see Mr. Shemin Halacha Gimel. Machlokes between Prichodesh and Radvaz. Those are two of the bigger names. But Prichodesh and the Radvaz as to whether ricotta cheese needs to be Gevinas Yisroel. Okay, ricotta cheese, if you remember, is when you make regular cheese, you have whey left over. So when you make regular cheese, you pull out the casein. That's one protein, leaving whey. If you pull out the whey protein, you can make a cheese out of the whey protein. And that cheese is called ricotta cheese. So
what word would I search for ricotta cheese?
Ricotta.
Ricotta.
Yeah, ratio, kuf, ricotta. So ricotta cheese is when you pull out from the whey protein, you're making a new cheese called ricotta cheese. And there's a shayla, there's a machlokes, Kosher Vaz, Mishnah for Halacha Gimel, a machlokes whether that cheese needs to be Gevinas Yisroel. So Rav Vosner says, what's the machlokes? He says that cheese is not made with rennet. You make it out of whey, and then you use heat. We talked about this. You use heat to get the whey to come out of the liquid. He says you're not using any rennet. He says why do some people think it's asher and some people think it's mutter? So Rav Vosner says it's totally in this shaila. Those who think it's asher, the Radvaz who says it's asher is because he holds anything that's cheese needs to be Gevinas Yisroel. Even though you don't use rennet to make it, the Takonos Chacham that all cheese needs to be Gevinas Yisroel. And the Prichodesh holds that the Chacham only made a takana for hard cheeses that could be made with rennet. Cheeses that have no shaykhs to rennet, like ricotta cheese has no shaykhs to rennet. Ricotta cheese, which is made by heating up whey, has nothing to do with rennet. That doesn't need to be good. So that's what Rav Vosner says is the machlokes between these achronim about ricotta cheese is the machlokes we're talking about.
What would you have to do to make Gevinas Yisroel?
Good question. I'll come to that. That's a very good question. We'll come to that. Okay, that's in the next piece. Okay. But we're trying to see, should it or should not. I'm going to get to that. Hold it. Jump ahead. The Chacham Zadam, when he says the din of Gevinas Yisroel, it's really a very short din, as you might expect. It's a very short din. And he says Gevinas Akum is asher, so the Shulchan Aruch said it's asher afilu hamidu basavim. Even if they coagulated the cheese with asavim, with a plant-based rennet, it's still asher. Well, the Chacham Zadam adds in two more words. He said afilu hamidu basavim oy memela. Okay? Does it happen by itself? Okay? What does that mean? Oy memela. What does it mean to make a cheese by itself? You can't make a hard cheese by itself. Hard cheese, you could sit there all day long and it'll never turn into hard cheese. You can't make mozzarella cheese or cheddar cheese by itself. The cheeses you can make by themselves, as we spoke about last time, was the soft cheeses. Because if you let milk sit by itself, it begins to sour. Bacteria eat on it, it begins to sour. When it begins to sour, the acid that they're creating, the lactic acid that those microorganisms are creating, causes the casein to fall out, creating a soft cheese. That's what you're doing. You're making a soft cheese. When you leave milk on the counter and you say, when it looked a week later like cottage cheese, that's what it was. It was cottage cheese. That's what you're doing. You're souring it. So a cheese that you can make memela means a soft cheese. That's what he's talking about. So the Chacham Zadam was assuming that soft cheeses were also included in the din of Gevinas Akum. That is, hamidu basavim, that could go either way. Oh, a memela cheese means a soft cheese. You can't make hard cheese memela. Okay, then the Aruch Shulchan says something similar. The Aruch Shulchan says, the Gevinas Akum applies, I'm going to read you his words, but he says it applies even to Gevina Pshuta Shalanu She'ein Ba Hamad Klal. Okay, what's the Gevina Pshuta Shalanu? I don't know what he meant. The simple cheese, whatever that means, She'ein Ba Hamad Klal, doesn't have any Hamad. Well, what does Ein Ba Hamad Klal mean? Also, he sounds like he's saying a cheese that just happens by itself. There's no Hamad. You don't do anything to make it happen. You don't put something in. It just happens by itself. What do you mean happens by itself? Happens by itself is a soft cheese. That's an acid-based cheese. It can happen by itself. If you leave it out, the microorganisms eat from it, they create lactic acid, which sours it and pulls out the casein to make a soft cheese. So those imply that the takana of Gevinas, the issue of Gevinas Akum applies to soft cheese also. You should just know within the Aruch Shulchan there's steers to this, what I just said to you. I told you this Aruch Shulchan says it, which is it's pretty strong on this side. There's two other places. In one he says, he says the reason why butter doesn't need Gevinas Yisroel is because, he says butter doesn't need it because it's ein bezeh hamada klal shenochutz or hakeva. Okay, when you make butter, you don't need hamada that needs keva. You don't need keva to make that, implying that's like the criteria. If you want to decide whether something needs or doesn't need Gevinas Yisroel, look at does it need a keva or doesn't need a keva. that implies, it's not as strong as the last one, but it implies that if you have a cheese that didn't need a keva, then it would be more butter-like. Okay? And there's other yukum also. Okay, so that's a question. We're not going to get into this. There may be answers to the Aruch Shulchan, but the simple reading of the main thing he said was that Gevina Pshuta Shalonu She'ein Bahamol L'Klal is usher. It sounds like he's talking about soft cheeses that they're usher also. There's a true Moshe where he talks about this. He talks about cottage cheese. That I can't tell you how he spells. He spells it in a whatever funny way. Cottage cheese, and he says he brings down why you would think about being makel, and he says you shouldn't aim limchois on those people who choose to be makel. He brings down that there is a svara to it, and you shouldn't protest those people who are makel. But the implication is that he thinks you should be machmer. The implication is that he thinks that you should be machmer in the shayla, and in fact, Rosh told that to Rabbi Haim himself, that you should be machmer in the shayla, and that's why the star K is machmer, that they will only take acid casein, which is made Gevinas Yisroel. Okay? Or, we'll see in a second, all the rest of the hashgachas don't do that. And the Mamela, the star K, as a matter of principle, won't give hashgacha to these things, and they lose many hashgachas because of that. Okay? There's one that we were just dealing with, that they recommended the hashgachas into the CRC because they couldn't do it. Because of this position, they couldn't give the hashgacha on the acid casein part of it, because it's not Gevinas Yisroel. And therefore they said, well, we can't do it. Lots of other people. They don't give us unless they're Gevinas Yisroel. Unless, right, yeah, they don't.
Don't you think it's starting cottage cheese?
Starving?
You'll have the sardine to do it, not the sardine to do it.
I would bet that they don't have the sardine, so I don't know about the sardine. It's oh, that's right. This case was a sardine case. I'm sorry, you're right. It's no, it's a
CRC.
they hold that it needs Gevinas Yisroel. Right, it needs Gevinas Yisroel. They hold that it needs. Well, what comes up more often, but what's more, so to speak, an ingredient. Cottage cheese is a finished product. Yeah, as an ingredient, is acid casein.
So those sour cream cottage cheese, no company will take them.
Correct.
Right.
No, correct. So that's correct. So that's as a matter. Ramosha in the Tshuva implies that you should be machmer. He told her behind him you should be machmer, and therefore they don't do it. That's what they do. Okay, now, so what in
Chol Yisrael is a machmer?
Yes, sure. Yes, the Chol Yisroel is machmer.
Well,
hold. Yes, the Chol Yisroel is machmer. Wait a second. I can get Chol Yisroel. Hold a second. So what does everybody else do? I just told you a whole. There's a shiloh whether it does or doesn't need Gevinas Yisroel. The poskim that I mentioned to you all seem to imply that it does need to be Gevinas Yisroel. Ramosha gives that implication. Chacham Sadon or Shulchan imply like that. Rav Osler says it's a machlekes achronim whether you need it. So most of the American hashgachos don't require it. The national hashgachos don't require Gevinas Yisroel and soft cheeses, which is why, to answer Ken's question, that's why if you go into the supermarket, you see loads of cream cheese and cottage cheeses with regular national hashgachos on them because they don't need Gevinas Yisroel. You never see. Until recently, you never see mozzarella cheese with a national hashgach on it, a national brand on it, because no one can afford to make that. It has to be Gevinas Yisroel. But on the soft cheeses, it's all over the place. You can buy loads of soft cheeses with a regular national hashgach because it's not Gevinas Yisroel, and they're being simuled on the Rav Henkin. Rav Henkin said that you could be making on the shiloh. I heard it myself. I heard it from Rav Chaim Chernow, who heard it from Tzuri Goldstein from Rav Henkin. He was a Talmud, and Rabbi Schwartz heard it from Raphael Greenstein, a Rav in Newark, New Jersey, from a different generation. That's what Schwartz heard about. But all back from Rav Henkin. We don't have it in writing, but Rav Henkin said such a thing, that you could be samech on the mekilim, that you don't need to have Gevinas Yisroel on the soft cheeses. But it's a different group of cheeses. This is hard cheese and this is soft cheese. It's two different types of cheese. And that's what all hashgachas, all the national hashgachas, except for the Star Kale, in samech on, to say that you don't need Gevinas Yisroel for those cheeses. Okay. So I just mentioned to you a bunch of names. He said this way, he said this way. Here are some of the rayas in either direction. The poskim that we talked about aren't bringing rayas to it. They're just like saying it in passing. It's like an assumption either is or is not cheese. So one is, I believe that this raya, I had this in my head that I heard this from Rabbi Avi Journal. That's my impression that I had this from. Okay, the Gemara says, the Gemara of Zara is declaring why did the Chum Aser doing this happen? What's the reason for the takana? The Gemara has a whole slew of answers as to why we asked it. The Shulchan Aruch said one of them, okay, the one that we passed on for halacha. But one of the answers that the Gemara gives is because Goyim would be maimed their cheese with wine, with vinegar, meaning with wine vinegar. And wine vinegar is straight. It's stam yayin. Okay, so he says, what do you make with wine vinegar? You can't make cheddar cheese with wine vinegar. The only thing you can make with vinegar is soft cheese. Of course you can make soft cheese with vinegar. If you put vinegar into your milk, you'll also have soft cheese. That's what you do. You put acid into it, something acidic into it, and it pulls out the protein. So this answer to the Gemara, that shot in the Gemara, is surely talking about soft cheese. Okay? So, of course, you could say that it's a machlokes between two answers. Maybe this answer holds this way, this holds this way. But it doesn't sound like that. The Gemara giving all these bunch of reasons sounds like they all agree on what cheese we're talking about. The Gemara talks about an afkamina between Gevina, but a different answer. Gevina Yavesha and Gevina Lacha, but that's not what this is. Gevina Lacha and Yavesha talks about a different thing. Gevina Lacha and Yavesha means Lacha. Gevina Lacha means the cheese before you squeeze out all the way out of it. When it first separates, it's just clumps of mushy curd floating around in the thing, and you squeeze it out. And Yavesha is after you squeeze it out. Okay, so but the implication is that all the cases are either mutter rosser, but not that that's a machlokes. Okay, so that's a raya to think that so she's talking Gevinas Yisroel. Now, the other side is, this is what David was talking about, is that we're going to find out later.
The Maisa, the Aruch will hold that the reason is for Gilui, right?
Yes. Because that can apply to soft cheese also. Right. So you're saying this, that's
because it's the water. That's the sort we make on nowadays, there's a sort we make on Gevinas Yisroel altogether.
2 times. One because I forgot what it was.
Because we're not going to give it, right? And then the sort we make it. But over here, that's sheepish.
So that would be an afkamina. Okay, good. That's a good point. Okay. So the Ramah's we're going to find out. We're going to find out that the Ramah holds the way you make Gevinas Yisroel is by having the Yid watch the making of the cheese. Okay, so
Participate, just watch.
that's what the Ramah is going to. We're going to find out. We're not really talking about that. The Ramah is going to say that it has to do with you watch the person making the cheese. Okay, so when the person watches, when you say you watch them, you watch your grains to make sure they don't become chametz. You make matzah shmura. That doesn't mean a guy should stare at it, right? The point is not to say, sit there and look at the machine. The point is, look and make sure of this chash that we have. Make sure that the grains don't become chametz. So you have to keep an eye on it. You're overseeing it to make sure it doesn't become chametz. Don't look at it. Not just to stare. The mitzvah is to look for a purpose. So over here, what would you say to the guy? Look at the thing and make sure they don't put in Rennet. So I'm lying. It's ridiculous. What are you looking at? They're making cottage cheese. Of course they're not putting in Rennet. What am I going to look at sour cream? What am I going to look at? I mean, if you look at the finished package, you see there's no Rennet. It's obvious. I mean, you look at it. Why would I think? It's like if I stand in a applesauce company and say, make sure they don't put any Rennet in it. It would be silly. What are you going to tell? One of us is just stand there and look. It seems silly to tell the guy stand in it. Okay, you could say like plug, but Rabbi Shachar was like, so what do we want the guy to do? Should we watch as they stick it onto the counter? Remember, they used to make soft cheeses without anything. You could make cottage cheese just by leaving it on the counter. So what should you do? When you take it, I'm making cheese. Now I watch it and I can go home. What are you going to watch? He says, should we sit and watch it for 2 days? It takes time until it turns. Not when you put in the acid. When you just let it sit. So should I just sit there and watch it for 2 days? So should I have mashgichim to meet him watching this thing turning into cheese? You know, it doesn't make any sense. What do you want the guy to do to make that? Okay, so the people who make it in the Chol Yisrael, which I think the Chol Yisrael is pretty standard that they make it. Gevinas Yisroel also. There's a mashgiach there, and nowadays they make cheese, even soft cheeses. They don't wait for it to turn into cheese. They add something into it. So the mashgiach watches them add it in. The mashgiach adds it in himself. But so he's doing what and that has to do with the shach. He does certain things. But those things make us question, how can it be that they require you to have watching? The Ramah holds watching what makes Gevinas Yisroel. What do they have in mind? Like, what could it be, such a thing that you'd watch to make it happen? Okay, so these are different topics.
Isn't the ikr in Gevinas Yisroel that the Jew owns it?
That's the shach. That's not the Ramah. That you're thinking about the shach. The shach says the Yid should own it.
Everybody agreed. It's Gevinas Yisroel, the Jew owns it. Then, if the Jew doesn't own it, then there's, other ways to do it.
We're going to wait for 2 times from now to talk about
that. Answer this question.
But that's what you're saying. That's an opinion. The Ramah doesn't say that. He thinks even the Ramah holds like that. So
I'm not sure. I thought that even the Ramah says the basic Gevinas Yisroel, the Jew owns the stuff. The Jew owns the stuff. Then you got other situations. Doesn't own it, so you got to do this and that.
You might be right. Right. So if that would be true, then that would be a way to get around it. Excuse me. We'll see when we get to 2 times. Hopefully 2 times from now. To see about that. Okay. Anyhow, so we're closing this sort of at this point to say that there's a lot of poskim who would imply that you need to have Gevinas Yisroel and soft cheeses. There's some questions, but the practice for most hashgachos, us included, is that we say Gevinas Yisroel is not required for these soft cheeses. Okay. Now, Rav Moshe and his tshuva adds an extra cage to it, which is, let's say you don't need Gevinas Yisroel. again, he's not so inclined to, let's say that. But Lamaisa is nowadays, for whatever reasons, they add a drop of rennet into these soft cheeses also. So while they're making cottage cheese, they throw in a little bit of rennet also into the cheese. So he wants to know, does that make it worse? Because cottage cheese, be'etzem doesn't need rennet. That's not how you make cottage cheese. But the fact that they're sticking in rennet, does that somehow now make it that now it does need Gevinas Yisroel? Be'etzem sour cream wouldn't, but this sour cream does, because the guy put in some rennet into it. Okay? So Ramosha says that Lamai says the amount that's put in is so minuscule, it would never make the cheese. It's not enough to create really a hard cheese. The amount you put in would do nothing to the cheese. And the Mela, you would call it Zevzak, or call it whatever you want to. It's just like an ingredient. It's not really the maimed, and therefore that doesn't make it need to have Gevinas Yisroel. Okay? And
I thought maybe I'm mixing two things, but if you put a miyat to something into it, it doesn't even come close to shisha, just a miyat. If it does something to it, that already puts it in a new getter that it's a major force in it.
Yes, you're right about that. The question is, but is that it has to be kosher. You don't let it put it if it's not kosher. But is that creating cheese? Is that saying that because I put it in, therefore this is now categorized as a hard cheese? It's not a hard cheese. It's not making a hard cheese.
But are you talking about a hard cheese, or are you talking about something that's going to cause a flavor enhancement or a visual enhancement?
Second.
Which is a major thing on Kashrus.
Right. So
it's not
but the question is not whether it has an effect. Maybe it does has a little effect. Maybe it has to be, since you put it in on purpose, you have to make sure it's kosher. The question is, but by doing that, did I turn this into a hard cheese? So he says, he didn't turn it into a hard cheese. It's coming out of cottage cheese anyhow. That little bit that he did, it doesn't make it hard cheese. It would never make it hard cheese. There's nothing. So it has to be kosher. What you're saying, it has to be kosher, but it doesn't make it cheese. It has to be Gevinas Yisroel. So when we talk to cheesemakers, they will monitor it, and they drew us out a chart of how much rennet you put in to make these different cheeses. The way they work is by 1,000 pounds. Okay, it's how much rennet per 1,000 pounds. And when you look at the numbers, how they give it, it is a very dramatic difference. The amount of rennet you put in for what we call the hard cheese is 70, 80, 90, some even more than that milliliters per 1,000 pounds. And the ones like the cottage cheeses and farmer cheese, the amounts they're putting in are like 1, 2, 3. Okay, it's like tiny amounts. Okay, you put in tiny. It's not like it's like a scale that goes 1, 5, 10, 20, 30. There's like a couple that are like 1, 2, and then all of a sudden the next one is 75. Okay, it's like this big space in between that, and then obviously the ones that are the soft cheese and the hard cheeses, there are exceptions. Every once in a while, Yossi hears about a company, and they're putting in 15 milliliters. They're putting in 20 milliliters, so they get full right there into the middle of there. The person can have been inclined to be more machmer, saying, we don't know if that's within this side of the line or that side of the line. We could talk about that. But for most of them, for the farmer cheeses and cottage cheese and cream cheese, the amounts are so tiny, it's obvious, not the other kind. But before I finish this part, I have to just tell you that about 2 years ago, Rabbi Gersten from the OU wrote something about this, and he pointed out a very interesting point, which is, just a technical point, which is, the number, I just told you some numbers. Use this many milliliters and this many milliliters per 1,000 pounds. So he said, first of all, is that the way you measure strength of rennet in a mixture is using something called IMCU, which stands for International Milk Clotting Units. Okay? It's a measure of how much rennet you have. Okay? In the United States, single strength rennet is 200 IMCUs, and in Europe, it's 130 or 140 IMCUs. So a milliliter of rennet in America and a milliliter of rennet in Europe are not the same thing. What we call 1 milliliter of rennet means 200 IMCUs. And what they call it is 130 IMCUs. Okay, so it's not the same thing. And on the other hand, when we make rennet, we think with these numbers we're talking about is in single strength rennet. There's also things as double strength and 5 times strength. You get stronger ones. So you have a 5 times rennet, you say, I'm only putting in 1 milliliter. Very nice. But you're really putting in 5 milliliters because it wasn't single strength, it was 5 times strength. So you're getting 5, the equivalent of 5. So that's just a technicality. When you're trying to figure something out, if they say they're using 20, but they're using 20 milliliters of 5 times strength, they're not using 20, they're using 100. Okay, so just to help understand that point. Okay. One last thing to finish off with. There was a cheese that came up for discussion. It's called Skyr. Okay, it's spelled S-K-Y-R. Okay, it's pronounced Skyr. It's spelled in such an unusual way because this kind of cheese comes from Iceland. That's what they eat over there. It's a yogurt type food, but this yogurt type food, is made with rennet, with a certain amount of rennet, and it seems that if you make it without the rennet, it doesn't come out the same. It comes out watery, and if you make it with the rennet, it comes out more solid. Now, the rennet, the amount that they're putting in is a tiny amount. Okay, it's an amount that would not coagulate the cheese, but it's had quite a dramatic effect on the thing. It doesn't come out the same if you make it without that. Rabbi Schwartz thought we should be making about that. There's another cheese that's like that also, baker's cheese. Baker's cheese also has rennet in it that's functional.
Does it come with answer?
Does baker's cheese come in? Does Skyr? Well, that was the question. They applied for Ashgacha. They applied for Ashgacha. The question was, should we treat it as soft cheese and say, no problem, easy, give Ashgacha, or say it needs Gevinas Yisroel? That was the question. Okay, Rabbi Schwartz said we should be making about that. The baker's cheese has rennet for a different purpose. There also, you always need to have rennet. There has to do with the way they filter it. Okay, it has nothing to do again with the making the cheese. It has to do with how they filter it. But the answer on both of these, the Skyr and the baker's cheese, are treated as soft cheese.